We're a strong nation. Now we are not an exceptional nation. We are a nation that is slipping away, and it's not all that complicated. We just have too often the people who have represented us have not had the determination, the understanding, and the commitment to liberty. That is what this country should be all about. We must understand a little bit more about liberty. We understand it generally, but we have to know where it comes from. It doesn't come from our government. It doesn't come from our neighbors. It doesn't come from anybody else. We don't give it to ourselves, but it is a gift. It's a gift from our Creator. We get our life and our liberty from our Creator, and it should follow that if you have a right to your life and a right to your liberty, you ought to have the right to keep the fruits of your labor. The founders of the country and the writers of the Constitution understood this because they didn't give us the income tax. That came later on. But if you have a right to keep the fruits of your labor, you will not have an income tax. When the Republic returns to us, you will not have an income tax on the people. You also will not have a central bank that's debasing your currency and destroying the value of the money. They will be gone. When we were so wealthy and having so much availability of the wealth, we got careless and we introduced this notion that we have an income tax at the Federal Reserve, that we change our foreign policy. This all happened in the teens, 1913, and in the Woodrow Wilson era, that we had this moral obligation to be the policeman of the world to spread democracy, that we needed a central bank. But this ushered in the age of big government. The income tax is obviously big government. They want more of our money so that they can spend that money. Never accepting the economic truism that says that it's much better for the people to spend the money than the government spending our money. But instead, the people went along with it, and it seemed like it didn't hurt us too much because the wealth kept pouring in, you know, and we stayed to a wealthy nation. We had so much wealth to consume. And then we even tolerated the inflation. The valuation of the currency since 1913 has been 98%. They've destroyed it gradually. But the end stages of the currency is like going off a cliff. And that has happened many times. We're not immune from that. And now that we are facing this crisis, that is what we have to be concerned about. Because the world is actually dependent on the creation of dollars. Bernanke now is in Europe talking to the bankers over there, the central banks of Europe and the various countries, especially the banks that are related to our banks. They got bailed out once and they're worrying about the next go around. And Bernanke says, yeah, we have to be there to bail out the banks. We can't have this crisis occur. But why are the banks in trouble? They bought up all the bad debt of the countries like in Spain and in Greece and Portugal. They have bad debt, but these banks bought them up. So we got, just 4 years ago, when our banks went bankrupt, we ended up holding the debt. Now they're preparing for us to assume the debt of these foreign countries as well. We can't afford that. It won't last. It'll come to an end before that. But we have to change this whole idea that America can continue to suffer because our middle class is shrinking. And every time they do this to it, our middle class shrinks and gets poorer, and the standard of living is going down. Actually, I believe that we can show statistics to show that this crisis actually started in the year 2000. There's been no real new jobs in the past 10 years. The standard of living has not gone up. Real wages for the working class have not gone up. The people on fixed incomes has not gone up. If you're on Social Security and fixed income, your standard of living has gone down, and yet they say, don't worry about it, there's no inflation. There's plenty of inflation. And this is the reason that people are more concerned. I think although conditions were worse at different times in our history, say World War II or the Great Depression, things were pretty bad. But then again, the crisis that we had in World War II, the conditions were different. We were still, in many ways, following the rules. We declared the war and win the wars. In the Depression, we were not a debtor nation. We were still a creditor nation. But today we are a debtor nation. We are the biggest debtor nation that ever existed in the history of the world. And we owe countries like the Chinese $1 trillion. That is some irony that we have to face up to and do something about it. But we cannot do it if we do not have a productive nation. And you can't be a productive nation unless you follow the rules of private properties and sound money and limited taxes, limited regulations, and not wasting our resources trying to be the policeman of the world. These last 10 years, we added $4 trillion worth of debt just for the wars that have gone on. But the entitlement system is a problem too. People think that, well, you know, there's always going to be some needy. And those who wanted to redistribute wealth through force of government, they convinced the whole country that, well, redistribution is important to take care of the poor people because they're entitled to it. But people aren't entitled to each other's, you're not entitled to somebody else's money. You can't go into their house and take their money. Did we ever get this idea that you're not entitled to go to your neighbor's house and take what they have and you don't have? What made it legal and what made it moral to send the government to do that? It's still wrong to do that. Entitlements are not rights. If that is the case, I mean, then we can't solve any problem. But it was always designed to help the poor people. But I think that was a facade. I think it was always an intended, you're pretending. But I think the poor end up not getting any real benefits, but they end up with the crumbs. And I think the housing bubble is the perfect example. Yes, people are qualified. Everybody should be able to get free education, free medical care, free housing, and they'll be taken care of. So they set up this program, print a lot of money, and let people buy a house. The price of houses will go up. We'll borrow some more money, spend more money, be a consumer, never thinking about savings and production and building industries. And what happened? Who made a lot of money during this time? It was Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Wall Street, the banks that were involved in the derivatives markets. And it was an obvious bubble to the free market economists, and they kept warning about this as a bubble, there's a bubble, we shouldn't do it. In 2006, as Bernanke was ready to take over the Federal Reserve, he reassured the country there were no signs of any defects in the housing market. So this is the kind of thing that went on. But then when the bust came, which was in 07 and 08, they yelled and screamed. They said, there's going to be a depression. There's going to be depression. We have to bail them out. They're too big to fail. So Congress rushes back into session. They start spending money. The Fed spent up to $15 trillion of churning credit. In secret. That's the real insult. In secret, they passed this money out. But guess what? The people who should have had the depression got the bailout. And guess what happened? The American people, the middle class, ended up owning this debt. And that is why somebody has to pay the bills right now. It's the shrinking middle class of America that is paying these bills. So this has to be reversed. We have to concentrate and understand monetary policy, but we have to understand the basic principles of individual liberty. We have to understand the basics of private property rights and how contracts are important. But we also have to work that into a much better understanding about what foreign policies should all be. And that is nothing new. I'm not inventing that. Those aren't my ideas. They've been around. They were developed by the founders. They put it into the Constitution. It was we, the people, who drifted away from it. But right now, what I am recognizing is that we, the people, are way ahead of the people in Washington, and we're demanding a change and a return to our constitutional principles.